What a fantastic season from George Springer. Absolutely unbelievable. Something nobody ever expected from this guy. But could this final season be George Springer's last dance? Let's talk about it.
You are Locked On Blue Jays, your daily Toronto Blue Jays podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jays. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network, your team every day.
Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Before tip-off, check the FanDuel app and see what's dropping during NBA Happy Hour every Friday from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern. As always, I'm Brittany Wasco. He's Carter First. You can find us on Twitter, Brayden5Wasco, Carter First too, as well as our main Twitter account at Locked On Jays. A lot to talk about. A guy I've been waiting to talk about. Me and Carter sort of had today's date penciled in on the calendar because it was finally the time that we could take a day and just chat about George Springer. The season that was. The season that will be in 2026. And the potential of the last dance type of feel. And that's a little bit shout out MJ in the Netflix documentary, for those of you who didn't know. I thought it was funny. Anyway, that is the big question, Carter, right? Will this be it for George Springer? Where will he go next? But what can he do, and can he repeat what he did in 2025? Or to what extent are we going to get that George Springer? So we'll start here. How much fun was watching George Springer in 2025?
Absolutely ridiculous. Like one of the most amounts of fun I've had in a long time watching anyone on the Toronto Blue Jays, especially because of how improbable it was. The 2024 season, we kind of thought that was the demise of George Springer, being in his mid-30s, kind of having this notion where he was trajecting downward since he signed with the Toronto Blue Jays. It seemed like he was getting worse and worse over his tenure. And people were looking at that contract, they were asking, hey, is this a contract that was worthwhile for the Toronto Blue Jays? I think almost what we saw from George Springer in 2025 was enough for that contract to be worthwhile in the grand scheme of things for the Blue Jays. Absolutely insane stuff from George Springer. Just looking at the 2 years, it's absolutely incredible. Going from a 600 OPS all the way up to a 950 is absolutely insane. Just some of the in-season adjustments that George Springer made, the ability to put that season in his past, the ability not to dwell on it and start to mentalize and materialize the idea that, oh, maybe this is it for me. Maybe I have played my best baseball in the past. Now you can make the argument that George Springer had the best season of his career in his age 35 season, which is absolutely incredible.
It is something special. And you don't see that happen too often. Usually guys fall off the face of the earth when it gets to a certain point in their careers, and that's it. And there's no changing anything, or some guys just aren't willing to make those adjustments, to go through the hard grind that is a bounce-back season. And I'm not going to sit here and lie to anybody and tell you that I expected that, or that I had that on my 2025 bingo card. That was not part of it. I'm very unbelievably pleased that it was, and probably a moment that will live in infamy for me will be the Canada Day Grand Slam. That was the home run of all home runs last season. The one that put a stamp on what the 2025 season could be. I think that all goes to George Springer.
I got one for you. I mean, all right. Seattle Mariners Game 7.
That one too. You're right.
I'm surprised you went to the Canada Day one before you went to one of the biggest moments of Blue Jays history of this century.
I'll tell you exactly why the Canada Day one sticks out above anything else.
Oh, it's because the Yankees. It has to be. It's because it's the Yankees.
It's because a little bit of the Yankees. But that's not only it, right? There's a lot that goes into it. And it was, I think up until that point of the season, we weren't sure what the Toronto Blue Jays were going to be. We knew they were going to be maybe good, right? We knew they were going to be a team that maybe had playoff potential. There was something in that moment on Canada's Day against the Yankees in a game that seemed like was going to slip away. Bang! George Springer sends everybody into a frenzy. And I think all across Blue Jays Nation, everybody's ears started to perk up at that point. Because what that showed for the remainder of the year was that this team can face adversity.
Adversity.
There we go.
There you go.
Got
yeah.
it.
Adversity.
Been a long day. Adversity and come out the other side, right? And use that. And they did use that moment, right? Moving forward, that was the start of the run, which I don't know. I think before that, yes, it maybe had a different feeling, but it really was that moment for me. That was like, holy smokes, this team might be very good. And I think that's why that one above anything else. I mean, obviously you're going to talk about the Bo Bichette home run, the Vladdy, I mean, pick one in the playoffs, home runs, the George Springer against the Mariners. But I don't know why the Canada Day home run just I think it'll always sit in the back. You know, it was Christmas Day, and I'll go back to a little tangent here. Christmas Day, my mom's making the food. We're having, or I guess it was Christmas Eve. She's making the food. And my dad, I think, was outside doing something and fiddling in the garage or whatever. And me and my brother sitting on the couch, and he was just on his phone, whatever. And I'm scrolling YouTube trying to, find something to watch. It was a very chill day. And it was like every highlight moment from the Blue Jays 2025 season. I should find the guys who YouTube channel it was. But anyway, I digress. And when it hit that moment, it was, again, hairs on the arm stand up. And I don't want to say tears in the eyes, but a little bit. It's like what could have been. And it was that moment. I don't know why. Throughout the seasons, I always think about the one big play, right? And the Jose Bautista one, the Ramel Tapia inside the park, right? And George Springer's. I don't know. It did something to me, Carter.
Hey, it made you feel things, and that's what George Springer is destined to do. That's what baseball makes you feel things. It's just kind of what it is. How can you not be romantic about baseball? How can you not love everything that George Springer did on the baseball field in 2025? And just kind of progressing throughout the years. In 2021, good year, but just wasn't really healthy. Had played 78 games throughout that season. 2022, decent year as well. You're not complaining about the year that George Springer gave you. 2023, again, it just kind of slowly started going down to the wayside. And it would have left not a sour taste in Blue Jays fans' mouths, but they weren't going to think of the George Springer contract being successful for the Toronto Blue Jays. Now you look at what he did in 2025. You're thinking of the season. You think, for me, Bo Bichette's home run was the greatest moment of my life until it wasn't, unfortunately. Yeah. And now that game did subside. Now, being able to reflect on how good that season was, as much as, it is still painful to look back at some of the highlights. Just what the significance of the home run for George Springer, and then obviously just advancing to the World Series, having it be a positive result for the Toronto Blue Jays. It has to be the George Springer home run. That's probably my favorite home run in Blue Jays history, at least for when I was alive. Joe Carter's was better, I get that, but unfortunately I was not alive to witness it. So George Springer, one of the greatest moments that I've ever seen in, honestly, all of sports for me. But just going through some of the stats here from what he did in 2024 to 2025, I mean, it's absolutely incredible. I'll start with walk rate, had a 9.8 in 2024, 11.8 in 25. In terms of OPS, I'll give you the exact numbers, 674 OPS, because I think George Springer had one good month in July in 2024. That pretty much didn't save the season at all, but saved some of the stats. 959 OPS in 2025, absolutely insane. When you're looking at weighted runs created plus, only a 94 in 2024, a 166 in 2025, 66% better than the average MLB hitter. Incredible. And then the last one I'll go into just to save, from the stat dump is the WAR. Had a 1.1 WAR in 2024, had a 5.2 WAR in 2025. A little bit more impactful to a winning roster. Then I guess what's left now is we can reflect on 2025 all we want. We'll remember that season for a very long time as Toronto Blue Jays fans. But how much magic does George Springer have left? Imagine the magical season. George Springer has his best season of his career, even better than 2025 in 2026. Does George Springer have enough magic to be a, I guess we'll say, serviceable baseball player for the Blue Jays in 2026?
Well, Carter, that is the big question, right? I think on every Blue Jays fan's mind right now, the question is was it a one-off, right? Or were the changes significant enough to give George Springer a few more years, or even a extra year? That, and I want to take a look at a little bit of what George Springer's Baseball Savant is, because I love that site, just seeing where they fall in the percentile. So we're going to bring you guys all that as we come through this episode and a whole lot more. So stick around with us until after this short break.
Today's episode is sponsored by Rocket Money. Let's be real. Managing your finances can feel overwhelming between subscriptions you forget about, bills that just keep going up, and trying to figure out where your money actually goes each month. It's easy to feel like you're losing control. And who has the time to track down every transaction or hunt down hidden fees? We certainly don't here. And that's why we use Rocket Money, the personal finance tool that helps you take control. It finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and can even help you lower bills so that you can grow your savings. I love how it tracks all my subscriptions, lets me cancel them right in app with just a few taps. You don't have to call literally every single customer service number, be on hold for multiple minutes at a time, just wasting your day trying to cancel these unwanted subscriptions. Rocket Money makes it so much more convenient. You can let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Join at rocketmoney.com/locked-on. That is rocketmoney.com/locked-on. And one more time, just why not? rocketmoney.com/locked-on.
So, Carter, as we continue on, this might be a little bit of a stat dump, but I have to say them because it is so outstanding. And this might be a George Springer glazing episode, but that's where we're
He deserves it.
He deserves it. You're right. So here we go. I'll jump into it. Before we get into what you say, and probably everybody says is the biggest question in regards to George Springer moving forward. His batting run value, 98th percentile. This one might seem a little low. I'm sorry that I have to put this one in here. His base running run value, only an 83 percentile, Carter. I'm sorry. His batting average, 98th percentile. Slugging, 98. Barrel percentage, 94. Hard hit, 78. Sweet spot, 96. His chase percentage, 94. His walk rate, 86. This is a guy that when you go down the hitting stat list, he was all red. And I wish I could tell you that somebody had a clue or an inkling that George Springer was able to do this. I'd be absolutely lying to you. And so I can't do that. I just want to appreciate the 2025 George Springer that was before we, I think, dive into what the 2026 George Springer might look like.
Yeah, and there's a lot of focus on the hitting for good reason. Like, the guy hit 309, and George Springer's usually prototypically a 260 hitter, averages and everything, but the home runs, the RBIs, the clutch value, just everything that George Springer was at the plate, absolutely phenomenal. But one thing that's kind of gone understated is we won't talk about the defense because the defense just simply isn't that good anymore. And we'll have to talk about George Springer being the DH in 2026. You can't have your DH not be a good hitter. That's just not going to be a good thing for a ball club that wants to, make some strides and have an even better season than they did in 2025. But George Springer on the bases, stealing 18 bases for the Toronto Blue Jays in his age 35-36 season by the playoff time, by the time playoffs rolled around. This guy was an absolute demon on the base paths, one of the smartest base runners on the Toronto Blue Jays. Again, the effort that he possessed every single play, still the speed that he has, even though, again, not the greatest fielder, still not the fastest guy out there. The reaction times maybe going to the wayside a little bit, getting older, but still was a very smart base runner, didn't really have any mental mistakes. And then you still have the Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Superman dives at home plate, some of the celebrations as well that we saw throughout the season. So it's not just George Springer at the plate, it's just the offensive player that's the reason they've been calling George Springer the offensive player that he is and was in 2025. So hopefully that could, persist and be a big part of what George Springer does for this baseball team in 2026 once again.
No, absolutely. I mean, he's a guy that's in the 66th percentile in sprint speed. I mean, what other team has a DH that's doing what George Springer's doing? There's not too many out there. That's sort of a dual threat that can hit the ball and can hit the long ball and do all that within as well being clutch, but also have the speed and knowledge of the base pass to get things done there as well, right? He's a guy that can take his walks, and when he does utilize them, or when he hits a single or gets a dribbler, he can take advantage of those and set this team up in different ways. There is a reason this team called him the offensive player, and for good reason. His ability to make things happen on the baseball field, it was just insane. And but Carter, that pushes us towards 2026 and what can he be there. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you, if I was a smart person, I would say that it might be a big regression from George Springer. but
That's
I'm not
even
going
a
to
crazy
say that.
take. I mean, that's not a crazy take at all. If you expect George Springer to do what he did in 2025 again in 2026, like, you're just absolutely insane.
It's how much.
Yeah, how much can he replicate? How much can he, try to produce for the Toronto Blue Jays? I'm not expecting, the 166 weighted runs created plus, but I'll go over what Fangraphs has him projected at for the 2026 season. So projected to have 138 games. It doesn't have exactly where he's going to play them, but you can guess that majority of those will be at DH. 25 home runs, a 261 average, a OPS of 798, a weighted runs created plus of 123, and being DH, the WAR won't be as high, but he was, again, DH predominantly in 2025, and he had a 5.2 WAR, but they project him as a 2.6 WAR guy. So based off those projections, it's not going to be as good as it was in 2025, we assume, but would you be okay with George Springer putting up those numbers in 2026 for this ball club?
Well, Carter, you brought up the weighted runs created plus from last season, and I was expecting the 125 range from Fangraphs. I'm not expecting that from Fangraphs, but that's sort of where I had him touted. I do think the batting average is going to be slightly higher than that. I think it may be over that 260 mark. I was thinking like the 273, something like that. But again, how much is that? Whatever. I think that's all pretty fair. If George Springer can give you 20 plus home runs with some clutch hitting in there as well, maybe a little bit better of a batting average than 260, I could honestly see him putting a little bit higher than that up. I'm thrilled with that. I'm not expecting George Springer to be 2025 George Springer, and that's for a few reasons. Number one, you're going to have Vladimir Guerrero Jr. still probably having a better season than he did in 2025, or hopefully having a better season than he did in 2025. You're going to have a bounce back year from Anthony Santander, which I've already got penciled on my wall right now. You're going to have to see what guys like Addison, Barger, Ernie, Clement do for you. What kind of year Daulton Varsho has if he's 100% healthy. There are a lot of other guys here that can make a difference, and that's not even including guys like Kyle Tucker, Bo Bichette, whoever. So I don't necessarily believe that you need 2025 George Springer to do damage in 2026. You need him to be good, but you don't need him to be the George Springer all-star, unbelievable clutch player that he was in 2025. That would be great, but I can't see that happening to that extent.
It would be absolutely ridiculous if George Springer was, again, the best hitter on the Toronto Blue Jays in 2026 in his age 36 season. But I went over the projections, 800 OPS. If you get that from George Springer, I am taking that every single day of the week for a 36-year-old player in the last year of his contract. I like you said, I'd be absolutely thrilled that George Springer put up those numbers. I think this year with Anthony Santander, assuming that he is or does have a bounce back from the offensive standpoint, having him in right field, I don't know if that's going to be a recipe for success for the Toronto Blue Jays, and I do think that they prefer to have George Springer in that DH spot just to have him focus on the hitting, have him available with some of the injury concerns that he has had in the past. It's just a lot safer for the Blue Jays to have him as the DH, but you got to assume that Anthony Santander will be DH'd at some points. Assuming that he has that bounce back season, you're going to want to have his bat in the lineup. And you're not necessarily going to want him playing defense every single day for your baseball team. So I'm assuming George Springer is going to have to play some right field. I don't think it will be a lot. It'll probably be about 25, 30, 35 games, whatever it ends up being. It won't be more than he's DHing, but I will be interested to see how he does manage playing right field and then hitting as well compared to when he's just playing DH. But one thing with George Springer is that if we see what he did in 2025 and that can transfer over to 2026, is that we saw George Springer have a little bit of a higher strikeout rate than he did in 2024, but also had a higher walk rate as well. So he was selling out for power, but he wasn't making dumb swing decisions. He was still having calculated swings. He was swinging at pitches that were elevated, pitches that he could do damage on. He wasn't just saying, oh, it's a 2-0 count, I'm just going to swing at this pitch no matter what. If it's a fastball high, if it's 4 feet out of the zone, he's still making smart and calculated swing decisions. So if he can transfer that over from 2025 to 2026, I'm not saying that he's going to, again, have MVP votes in the AL, but I'm assuming that George Springer can once again be a productive hitter if he can transfer over a lot of the skill sets that he had and established in 2025 over to this 2026 season.
Yeah, Carter, and you know what? That's the one thing I wanted to touch on. Going into our last segment here is the biggest change and why George Springer may have had such a great season in 2025, and what we can take from that moving into 2026, and a little bit talk about this probably potentially being George Springer's last dance with the Toronto Blue Jays right after this short break. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You guys know how much we love FanDuel here at Locked On Blue Jays. We're sports gamblers. We like to play some FanDuel. And Fridays just got a whole heck of a lot more exciting. They already feel different during basketball season, and FanDuel's making them even better. Every Friday night before the games tip off, FanDuel gives fans a new way to kick off the weekend with NBA Happy Hour. NBA Happy Hour is your official pregame, a limited time window where special offers drop right inside the FanDuel app before the action starts. So before tip-off, check out the FanDuel app and see what's dropping during NBA Happy Hour every Friday from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern. A little basketball, little action, and a whole lot of Friday energy. That's NBA Happy Hour only on FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. So, Carter, the one thing I wanted to touch on is the swing decisions and in totality what that encapsulates for 2025. And to me, that goes into a few things. So the swings that George Springer was taking were still aggressive swings. They were aggressive swings before. The difference is it's not at every pitch. A lot of what we've seen from George Springer in 2024 was the fact that he tried to get to everything. He wanted to be the contact guy that puts a bat on every ball, that doesn't give pitchers a whole lot of room to move. But what that does is it opens you up to a lot of ground balls, a lot of fly balls, a lot of weak outs. And that's something I think that when, we just talked about David Popkins a couple days ago, Carter, what he worked with George Springer about is the fact that you don't need to contact every ball. You need to contact your ball and the pitch that you want to hit, because otherwise you're throwing an at-bat away. And so that's the biggest change in George Springer's game. And I know we've talked about it a little bit before, but to me, it's not even necessarily the swing itself. That's completely an approach thing. And it completely shifted George Springer's mindset in last few years of his career in Toronto.
In baseball, you don't want to strike out often. You don't want to strike out 35, 40% of the time, even 30% of the time. But with George Springer, what's going to hurt you more, especially in advantage counts, in a 2-1 count, a 2-0 count, a 3-0 count? Swinging at a borderline pitch and having that soft contact, having that ground ball, or, swinging and missing at it and just really kind of selling out for that damage and trying to do damage with your swing, trying to put a good swing on the ball, trying to get that hit a gap, trying to get that double down the line, maybe the ball out of the ballpark. Is selling out for that a little bit more of the power and swinging and missing, making that count, instead of 2-0, 2-1 compared to that infield ground ball to the shortstop, the rollover? What's going to do more damage in the grand scheme of things? At least if you do swing and miss, you get a chance to reset. You get a chance to, maybe if it's a 2-strike count, to just, have that contact swing. It's all about the situational awareness. And George Springer got a whole lot better at being aggressive in those advantage counts, being aggressive when he could be, rather than, just having that defensive swing in that 1-1 count, in that 1-0 count, the 0-1 count, whatever it may be. George Springer was looking to swing with intent, and that's what we saw immensely from George Springer in 2025. There is, a lot of concern for George Springer, though, having that season, having the caliber of season that he did have. Can he replicate that? Can he have just a serviceable season? As a DH, like I said before, you can't have your DH, being a league average hitter. That's not exactly what you want from George Springer. With the current trajectory of the Toronto Blue Jays, for George Springer at this point in his career, it wouldn't be the craziest thing to expect that. But the Blue Jays need him to be better if he is going to be their everyday DH. You want your DH to be one of the best hitters in your lineup because they are not playing defense. They are there solely to hit. So if George Springer cannot hit above average, unfortunately for the Jays, that might be a situation where I don't know if you necessarily bench George Springer. I'm not saying do that. But it might not be the most beneficial if George Springer can't be that above average hitter that they do need, the middle of the order bat that they need in this lineup.
Yeah, so Carter, I guess in all of this conversation, and I mean, we've sat here and it's been George Springer glaze up and down the whole podcast, but that's fine. I guess my big question is, will this feel a little bit like a last dance? Will this feel a little bit like a big, good sayonara to George Springer? And I'm not saying that I'm having you project that they're going to win the World Series. But I am asking you do you think he's going to put on a good enough season where the Toronto Blue Jays, he lives in infamy in Blue Jays land? I mean, maybe he already does for a lot of people, and I can totally understand that. But do you think he becomes one of the all-time great Blue Jays with sort of capping off this year with a really good season, and that sort of ends his tenure? Or how do you just think it's going to go, I guess?
I think this is the last season for George Springer in Toronto, so I'd say it's the last dance for the Blue Jays. I do think he's not done in Major League Baseball. I do think that another team will take a shot on George Springer. It won't be, that $20 million contract necessarily, but George Springer will still have value in Major League Baseball. I think he still can be a corner outfielder. It will be below average for sure, but I think that for a lot of teams, even if they have the possibility to roll him out as a DH, it really depends on what he does here in 2026. But I would not be surprised if George Springer does sign with another team. However, just for the future of the Toronto Blue Jays, the direction that they're trying to go, having Anthony Santander, locked up for another 4 years, barring a trade, something where they can move off of that contract, they don't want Anthony Santander in right field. Nobody, fans, the organization, the front office, John Schneider, all of these guys, don't want Anthony Santander for his defense. They want him for that bat. So for the future, it would make a lot more sense if Anthony Santander was the DH of this team. And George Springer just doesn't necessarily fit into, I think, the Toronto Blue Jays' future plans, even if he does have an incredible season. Like, if he has a similar season to 2025, sure, maybe I'll change my thought a little bit on this and my stance on it. But with the way things, I think, will work out for George Springer, I don't know everything, but I like to think I know a decent amount. I expect George Springer to be a good hitter, but I don't think it will be enough for the Toronto Blue Jays to extend him anything past the 2026 season.
Yeah, we're going to have to wait and see. It's going to be a fun ride, and I'm happy we get to witness, especially last year, we got to witness a good season of George Springer and what he can be. Not just a good season, a great season of George Springer. As always, we want to thank you guys for tuning into the episodes, being a part of this every single day that we bring you guys episodes. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. The season's coming quick.
I got one more thing for you, just to kind of end off this episode. Sure. And I won't even say my piece on this, but does George Springer remain as the leadoff hitter for the 2026 season? Is he going to be the number one guy, or are they going to experiment? And by the end of it, could you see George Springer being somewhere in the middle of the order?
Yeah, probably. He starts the season as the number one. He's earned that. He deserves it. Fair enough. I don't really want to play the guessing game because who knows? I mean, he may flip-flop a little bit. You might see him a little bit in the leadoff. Then, he might have a bad month and they got to go somewhere else. And that's the nature of baseball. It's a little bit up and down. But if this team gets back to the playoffs, I think you're expecting George Springer to be fairly decent. So maybe he goes back in towards the end of the season. I guess that's my take on it.
Yeah, he definitely starts the season, I agree, as the number one hitter. I think it really depends on other players on this roster. The only one I can really see being a leadoff guy is Ernie Clement if he has another fabulous season. But George Springer, probably the number one guy. I don't think we'll see Andres Gimenez ahead of him. Andres Gimenez hitting 4, George Springer hitting 5 at one point in 2025. Absolutely ridiculous to look back at. But 100% George Springer is the number one leadoff hitter going into 2026 after what he did for the Toronto Blue Jays in 2025. But we are, we're looking forward to the start of the season, slowly getting closer and closer to the day that pitchers and catchers report, slowly getting closer to those spring training storylines, maybe, a random trade popping up just before the season. We'll have to see how things do pan out, but just want to say thank you guys for watching. All the likes, comments, support, everything recently has been much appreciated, and we will be back with you guys once again on Monday.